She made one comment, just one, and in less than 10 minutes her entire career came crashing down. Fired in front of a plane full of people, her life would never be the same again. What happened next? Stay with us to find out. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. It was just another routine flight, or so everyone thought. The plane had taken off smoothly from New York, heading toward Miami. Passengers settled in, a few chatting with each other, some watching movies, while others simply stared out the window, waiting for the journey to unfold. Among them was a flight attendant named Lisa, doing what she had done countless times before, making sure everyone was comfortable, serving snacks, and keeping the cabin in order. It was an uneventful flight, until it wasn't. In the middle of her service, Lisa overheard something that would change everything. Donald Trump, on board the same flight, was sitting a few rows ahead. He wasn't loud, but his voice carried, especially in the quiet moments. Lisa wasn't one to pay attention to politics, but when she heard the words, "The country is a mess under the new president," something inside her snapped. She had heard enough. Without thinking, without a second thought, Lisa muttered, almost under her breath, "At least things weren't a disaster under my president." She didn't even realize what she'd said at first. The words slipped out, unfiltered. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The rest of the crew, who had been moving around the cabin, froze. A few passengers exchanged uncertain glances. It wasn't just any comment. It was a comment aimed directly at someone who, whether you liked him or not, had a reputation for responding aggressively to anything that felt like a slight. Lisa knew right away she'd made a mistake. But before she could retract the statement, she saw Trump turn around slowly, his eyes locking with hers. For a split second, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Lisa didn't know what he would do, but she was already regretting the words that had left her mouth. The tension hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. But Trump didn't speak, didn't fire back with a tweet or a remark. He simply turned back around, looking straight ahead, as if he hadn't heard her at all. But Lisa knew that wasn't the case. That look told her everything. Something had shifted. The air felt colder now, heavier, and, as she moved down the aisle to finish her service, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the unease stayed with Lisa. The passengers around her carried on with their own business, some oblivious, others too afraid to speak. Lisa tried to act normal, but she could tell by the way the other flight attendants glanced at her that they were aware something had happened. She couldn't tell if they were judging her or just unsure of what to do next. Then, just as the plane was starting to level out, the tension broke when her supervisor appeared at the front of the cabin. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, a strange seriousness in his eyes. Lisa knew deep down this was the moment. Lisa's heart started to race as her supervisor, a tall man named Paul, slowly walked toward her. He didn't smile, didn't wave, or even acknowledge her greeting. His face was calm, but there was something about the way he held himself that made Lisa's stomach churn. She tried to stay composed, to pretend nothing was wrong, but the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. She had just made a comment that could cost her everything. She thought back to the look Trump had given her, a look that said he wasn't going to forget. Paul stopped in front of her, his gaze steady. "Lisa, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice low but clear enough for anyone nearby to hear. There was no tone of anger, no sharpness to his words, but the message was unmistakable. This wasn't a casual request. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. Lisa followed him to the front of the cabin, her steps feeling heavier with each one. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what was going on. Had Trump said something to Paul? Had someone else overheard her comment? Her palms began to sweat and she felt a knot tighten in her chest. Every part of her wanted to backtrack, apologize, pretend it had never happened. But she knew it was too late for that. She had already said it, and now she had to face whatever came next. As they reached the front, Paul motioned for her to step aside into a small, quiet corner of the galley. The other flight attendants were busy with passengers, their heads turned away, giving her some privacy. Lisa's eyes darted around, but there was no escaping the fact that everyone could sense something was wrong. They just didn't know what. Paul looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You're being let go, Lisa. We can't keep you on after what happened back there." The words hit her like a slap to the face. She blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Fired, just like that. Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She tried to collect herself, tried to find something to say, but the reality of it all was too much. "I didn't mean," she started, but Paul cut her off. "Doesn't matter. You crossed a line and this company won't tolerate it." His words were blunt, matter of fact. No room for negotiation. Lisa felt her chest tighten as the weight of the situation finally settled in. There was no way back from this. No second chance. The life she had built, the job she had worked hard to keep, was slipping through her fingers in a matter of moments. She stood there, stunned, as Paul continued. "We're going to have to ask you to leave the plane when we land." His voice was soft, but the authority behind it left no room for argument. Lisa didn't know how to respond. The words "fired" and "leave the plane" echoed in her head, and she couldn't seem to shake them. Everything felt surreal. The buzzing of the plane, the murmur of passengers, the flight attendants still doing their jobs, none of it mattered anymore. Lisa was being kicked off the flight, in front of everyone. No privacy, no time to pack her things, just a public dismissal. She had never imagined it would end like this. Lisa stood there, frozen. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. Her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts, regret, disbelief, anger, but none of them could change the fact that she was being fired. In front of everyone. It felt like the entire cabin had become suffocating, like all eyes were on her, even though most passengers were still preoccupied with their own things. Her face flushed with heat, a mix of shame and frustration flooding her body. Paul, seeing her struggle, didn't offer any more words. He simply nodded toward the galley exit. Lisa knew what he meant. It wasn't a suggestion. He was telling her it was time to go. Still, she hesitated. The suddenness of it all left her unsure of what to do next. "But it was just one comment," she whispered, almost to herself. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to Paul, to the air, or to herself. It didn't matter. Her voice was barely audible, and she didn't expect him to respond. Paul didn't. Instead, he stepped back slightly, his posture rigid. He didn't look sympathetic, but there was no malice either, just business. "I'm sorry, Lisa, we don't have a choice." The words hit her hard. The apology was so distant, it almost felt worse than if he had been cold or indifferent. It was like they had already moved past her, and she was just another part of the flight they could sweep away. But it wasn't over for her. It was far from over. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was happening. There was no turning back. The humiliation was one thing, but the realization that her career, her income, her routine, everything was just gone. It felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. "I need to pack my things," she said, finally finding her voice, though it sounded hollow to her own ears. Paul's gaze softened just slightly, but not enough to make a difference. "You don't have time. We'll handle it from here. You just need to get off the plane when we land." Lisa nodded, though the words didn't register. She felt like she was moving through a fog, a haze of disbelief. All she could think about was how quickly everything had turned. She had been fine just minutes ago, working, moving through the aisles, doing her job. Now, in the span of just a few minutes, her life had been turned upside down. She turned slowly, knowing there was nothing left to do but go back to her seat, where she'd be seen, where everyone would know. It wasn't the way she'd imagined leaving a job she'd given so much of herself to. She couldn't even remember the last time she had done something this reckless. Sure, she'd had her moments of frustration before. Who hadn't? But this was different. It wasn't just the comment. It was the timing, the setting, the person involved. Lisa's thoughts scattered as she made her way back to the crew area. She could feel the stares of the other attendants as she passed, though they didn't speak. They didn't need to. There was a silent understanding in the air. They knew exactly why she was being let go. They all knew what had happened. The weight of their silence made everything even harder to bear. And then, as she reached the galley, she heard the first few whispers from the passengers. Just a few words exchanged quietly, but they were enough to pierce the tension. "Wasn't that the one who said something about Trump?" one of them asked. Another murmured, "Is she really getting fired?" Lisa kept her head down, her hands trembling as she tried to focus on the task at hand, getting to the back of the plane, staying as invisible as possible. The last thing she wanted was to face their questions, their judgment. But it didn't matter. There was no escaping what had just happened. Her name, her mistake, would soon be all anyone remembered about her. And in just a few minutes the entire plane would know she was the one who had crossed the line. The flight felt longer than it should have. Lisa tried to keep her mind occupied, focusing on the small tasks she had left to finish before landing. But every time her eyes wandered to the passengers, or she caught a glimpse of one of her fellow flight attendants, the reality of the situation hit her all over again. She was on the clock, every second counting down to the inevitable landing, when she would be asked to leave. Fired. It seemed unreal. The tension in her chest only grew heavier. She glanced over at the other flight attendants, but no one met her eyes. They were all focused on their work, avoiding her like she had some kind of contagious disease. It wasn't just the passengers who were watching now. Even her colleagues seemed to keep their distance. Lisa's thoughts kept circling back to the same moment. The instant she'd made that comment. The look on Trump's face. She had expected a reaction, sure, but not like this. She thought she could get away with it, or at least that it wouldn't escalate so quickly. But now, here she was, counting down the minutes until the plane landed, and her career would be over. It wasn't the first time she dealt with difficult customers, but something about the situation felt so different. This wasn't just another rude passenger or a tough day. This was a political statement, whether she meant it or not. A mistake that, in hindsight, seemed bigger than it had felt in the moment. She didn't even believe in the things she had said, at least not in the way they had come out. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that she had crossed a line, and there was no way to undo it. The regret started to settle in, slowly sinking deeper. As the plane began its descent, Lisa's stomach churned. The lights dimmed, the seatbelt signs flashed, and the captain's voice echoed overhead, telling everyone to prepare for landing. It should have felt like a relief, a return to normal. But to Lisa, it was anything but. She was on the verge of something much worse. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and the passengers began buckling up, some chatting, some quietly staring out the window. Lisa stood there at the back of the cabin, pretending to go through the motions. Every few seconds, her eyes flitted nervously over to the front of the plane, where Paul was still in his seat, not saying anything but making sure everything was running smoothly. Minutes passed. Lisa felt time stretch out like she was moving through thick syrup. It was the longest descent she'd ever experienced. Her mind kept racing, thinking of what she might say when they finally landed. Would she apologize again? Would it make any difference? Was there anything she could do to fix what was already broken? But deep down, she knew the answer. She was about to be escorted off the plane, and there was no coming back from it. Finally, the wheels of the plane touched the runway with a gentle thud, and the familiar hum of the plane's brakes echoed through the cabin. Lisa's heart hammered in her chest as the plane slowed, as if it were dragging out the inevitable. Passengers began to unbuckle, pulling out their bags and preparing to leave. The normal hustle and bustle of a landing was now a sharp contrast to the quiet storm inside her. As the plane taxied to the gate, Lisa couldn't help but feel the weight of every single second. She stood there, waiting for the moment when she would have to face the final blow, the final moment that would erase her from the flight, from the job she had worked so hard for. It was almost as if she was already standing outside the plane, staring at it from a distance. How had things gone so wrong so fast? The plane came to a full stop at the gate, and for a brief moment everything went still. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The cabin buzzed with the usual noise of people gathering their belongings. but to her, it all sounded muffled, like she was hearing it from underwater. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, even though they hadn't done anything overt to show it. But she knew. She could feel the judgment in the air. Paul stood up from his seat, walking toward the front of the cabin. His movements were deliberate, each step bringing him closer to Lisa. She tried to steady herself, trying to pull together the last shred of composure she had left. It wasn't easy. It was hard to swallow the reality that her career in the skies was over, just like that. But there was no escape now. As the passengers began to file off the plane, Paul motioned for Lisa to follow him. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say anymore. The words she wanted to say, apologies, explanations, felt meaningless now. What was the point? She had crossed a line that she couldn't take back. The walk toward the exit was slow, as though every step took her further from something she couldn't bring herself to let go of. She walked past rows of passengers who were now looking at her with a mix of curiosity and indifference. Some glanced away, clearly not wanting to get involved. Others stared openly, trying to piece together what was going on. Lisa couldn't blame them. They didn't know the full story. All they saw was a flight attendant being escorted off the plane, and that was all they needed to see to understand that something had gone terribly wrong. As they reached the exit, Lisa noticed the supervisor waiting by the door. He wasn't looking at her yet. He was speaking with the gate agent, checking in with them about something. Lisa's nerves spiked. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she was paralyzed. She felt trapped, exposed, and powerless. There was nothing left to do except wait for the final instruction, the final confirmation that her career in the skies was done. Paul spoke first. "This is it. You'll need to get your things. The gate agent will help you with the rest." His voice was cold, as though he had already moved past the situation, already on to whatever was next. Lisa's stomach twisted at the thought of it. How easily it seemed to have moved from one issue to the next. But she couldn't afford to focus on that now. She had to deal with the reality she was facing. For the briefest moment, Lisa thought about asking for some time to gather her belongings, maybe even explain herself one last time. But the thought faded as quickly as it came. What would it change? Nothing. She had already said too much, and now there was no fixing it. The gate agent stepped forward, eyes scanning Lisa's face. It was clear they had already been briefed. "Ma'am, I'll help you with your exit. We'll arrange transportation for you once we're off the plane." There was no kindness in their tone, no sympathy, just the professionalism of someone who had seen this sort of thing happen before. Lisa nodded, the reality of her situation sinking in. She wasn't just leaving the plane. She was leaving the life she had worked so hard to build. In a matter of minutes, she would be off the plane, standing in an airport, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she had just made one mistake that had cost her everything. As the last of the passengers filed past, some giving her uncertain glances, Lisa stepped off the plane. The feeling of the cold terminal air hitting her was sharp, and for a moment, she just stood there. The plane was still in her line of sight, but it felt so far away now. Everything she had known, the routine, the job, the security, was now just out of reach. And in that moment, Lisa knew there was no going back. Lisa stood there in the terminal, the hum of the airport all around her. But it felt like she was in a vacuum. The noise seemed distant, muted, as if she were on the outside looking in. The gate agent walked ahead, motioning for her to follow, and with no other choice, Lisa fell into step behind them. She could feel the weight of the last few moments hanging over her, but there was no escaping it. There was no magic words to undo what had happened. As they walked through the gate and into the hallway, the sound of her shoes against the cold floor seemed louder than it ever had before. Every step felt like a reminder of how quickly everything had changed. A few airport employees passed by, but they didn't look at her. They didn't need to. She could tell by their expressions they knew something had gone down. People always knew. Her heart still pounded in her chest, a constant thud that didn't seem to slow. The reality that she was now officially unemployed hit her in waves. But the worst part? The worst part was the embarrassment. Being fired in front of a whole plane of people, most of whom would never forget her face. She could already hear the whispers. Did you hear about the flight attendant who insulted Trump? She got fired mid-flight. The stories were already writing themselves, and they wouldn't be kind. She could almost hear the judgment, the mockery, but no one cared enough to understand the full story. All they would know was the result. It wasn't even about politics, Lisa realized. The comment she made, it wasn't about Trump. It wasn't about the president. It was about her own frustration that boiled over at the wrong moment. She had let herself get swept up in something that wasn't even her fight. And now she was paying the price. The regret, the embarrassment, they sat heavy in her chest like a lead weight. They reached the main terminal area, where the gate agent paused and glanced back at her. "I'll arrange for a taxi to take you to the nearest hotel," they said, their voice matter-of-fact. "The company will reach out to you later about your benefits, but for now, you're free to go." Lisa nodded without saying anything. She wasn't sure what to feel anymore. She didn't feel free. She felt empty. The truth was, she didn't know what was next. The gate agent turned to leave. They're back to Lisa now. For a moment, she just stood there, alone in the middle of the terminal, watching the people around her moving in their own busy worlds. The passengers from her flight were long gone, and she was left with nothing but the quiet, empty space that stretched ahead of her. She didn't know what she was supposed to do now. What was she supposed to feel? She wasn't sure. Her mind started to replay the scene over and over again. That moment when she'd made the comment. The look Trump had given her, his cold silence, the way it had all escalated so quickly. She had known the second the words left her mouth that it was a mistake, but there was no taking it back, and now it had cost her everything. Lisa walked over to a nearby chair, her legs feeling heavy beneath her. She collapsed into it, staring blankly at the floor. She had been in this airport hundreds of times before, boarding flights, serving passengers, doing her job. Now, it felt like a different world entirely. This place that she had once walked through with confidence now felt like an alien landscape. The world she had known, gone in an instant. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, staring at the screen without really seeing it. No new messages, nothing. A few missed calls from her mom, but Lisa didn't feel like talking to anyone just yet. Not now. She put the phone down, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair, trying to steady herself. It felt like time had stopped. The airport, the people, the world outside, none of it mattered anymore. She had no idea where to go, what to do next. There were no answers, no directions to follow. Just the cold, hard truth that she had made a mistake, a big one. And now she was here, in this terminal, with nothing but the weight of it on her shoulders. Her eyes started to sting. She fought the tears, pushing them back, but it was hard. It was so hard. She wanted to scream, to let it all out, but she couldn't. Instead, she sat in silence, feeling completely alone. The only sound she could hear was the low hum of the airport, and even that felt like it was miles away. The reality of being fired, of losing everything so quickly, was settling deeper in her bones, and she had no idea how to pull herself out of it. Her life had been turned upside down in a matter of hours, and she had no idea where to go from here. Lisa sat in that chair for what felt like an eternity, her mind spinning in circles. The minutes ticked by, but nothing changed. The airport, bustling with travelers, seemed so distant now. She watched people hurrying by, some on their phones, some rushing to their gates, and for a moment, she wondered how their lives could continue as usual when hers had been turned upside down. She wanted to be like them, moving, distracted, focused on something that mattered. But she couldn't. Not right now. Eventually, she stood up, feeling the weight of her body as if it belonged to someone else. Her legs were shaky, and every step felt like a reminder of the life she had just lost. She pulled her phone back out of her pocket, almost instinctively, but there was still nothing. No messages, no calls. The silence in her life was deafening. It seemed strange considering how many people she interacted with daily. how many faces she saw in a plane full of passengers. Yet now, no one seemed to be reaching out. Not that she expected them to. The only person who might have cared enough to call was her mother. Lisa had never been shy about sharing her frustrations, but telling her mother this, it felt like too much to bear. She couldn't call her yet, not until she had figured out how to make sense of it all. Lisa walked slowly to the nearest kiosk and stared at the departures screen for a while, half-heartedly thinking of booking a flight back to New York. But to where? What would she even do once she got there? What was left for her there anyway? She had no job now. The company would likely cut her off from everything. Benefits, insurance, all of it. They had no reason to keep her on. She wasn't even sure how to feel about that. Anger, relief, guilt? What did it mean anyway? Being fired for something so stupid, so impulsive. A comment made in the heat of the moment without thinking, without realizing the consequences. Was it really that bad? She wasn't a political person, and she didn't have any hatred for Trump. Hell, she didn't have a deep opinion about him at all. But she had acted on an impulse, and now she was left paying the price. She turned away from the screen and started walking toward the nearest exit, unsure where she was going. She just needed to be away from the airport for a while. The sterile, chaotic environment felt suffocating now. She needed space. Something that wasn't reminding her of the last few hours, of the public dismissal that had shattered her sense of security. The sound of her footsteps echoed as she walked, the heavy silence creeping in again. She couldn't think about what had happened anymore. There was no changing it. The plane was long gone. The passengers were off to their next destinations. Everything had moved on. But she hadn't. She was still here, standing in this limbo, stuck in the aftermath of a momentary slip-up. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the city. It felt strange to see something so peaceful when she was caught in this storm inside her head. The streets were busy with traffic, people coming and going, and Lisa felt like an outsider, watching a world that no longer made sense to her. She had no idea where to go or what to do. She pulled out her wallet, checking how much cash she had left. It wasn't much, just enough to get through a night in a hotel maybe. But that didn't even seem to matter. How long could she keep this up? She didn't have a plan. There was no next step. Everything that had once seemed so secure, her job, her routine, even her confidence, had disappeared. What was left? The nagging thought kept running through her head. How could I have been so stupid? She thought about all the people she had let down, not just the company, but the people who trusted her, the passengers who depended on her. What kind of example had she set by losing control like that? For what? A passing comment about someone who would never hear it? Was it even worth it? Lisa leaned against the glass door of the airport, staring out at the city. She was tired, not just physically but emotionally. She felt drained, like every bit of energy had been sucked out of her. She knew she had to make decisions, but all she wanted was some time to breathe, some time to get her head straight, even if she didn't know how to do that. As she stood there, the cold air from the outside hit her, and she finally stepped out of the airport, into the city. It wasn't much, but it was something new. And at that moment, something felt different. She wasn't sure what it was, but there was a small part of her that felt a little lighter. Maybe it was the realization that this wasn't the end of the world. Maybe it was just a mistake, a stupid, impulsive mistake, but a mistake all the same. And while she didn't have the answers yet, while she didn't know what came next, she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let this define her. No matter how badly she'd messed up, she wasn't going to stay in this hole. She was going to figure it out. She had no other choice. The cool night air did little to calm the storm in Lisa's mind. As she walked aimlessly through the streets, her footsteps echoing in the empty spaces between buildings. The city, usually so full of life, now seemed foreign to her. It was as if she had stepped into a world that didn't belong to her anymore. Her usual sense of control, the comfort of routine, the security of her job. It was all gone, and with it any sense of direction. She could have called a cab, taken a bus. But where would she go? What would she do when she got there? As she wandered, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Lisa pulled it out, half expecting it to be someone from the airline, some final communication about her departure, or some formal note of dismissal. But it wasn't. It was a text from her mother. "Are you okay?" Lisa stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't want to reply. Not yet. Not when she didn't have the answers herself. What could she say? How could she explain? The shame of it was still fresh, thick, and suffocating. She wanted to lie to her, to tell her everything was fine, that it was just another day, but she couldn't. She had to tell her the truth. The weight of her mother's worry on top of her own guilt would only make things worse. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she just held the phone in her hand, staring at the message. The world around her felt unreal. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, cars honked, and people walked past. But none of it mattered. Nothing had meaning. Nothing had any relevance to her now. All she could think about was the moment she had spoken those words, the words that had set everything in motion. The regret gnawed at her insides like a constant reminder. The question kept repeating in her mind. Why did I say it? Her feet carried her through the streets without much thought, her mind still a blur of confusion and disbelief. It was hard to focus on anything but the empty pit that seemed to have formed in her chest. It wasn't just about losing her job. It wasn't even about what Trump might have thought of her. It was about how quickly her entire life had unraveled. One comment, one slip-up. That was all it took. She couldn't believe how fast things could change, how easy it was to lose it all. Lisa found herself near a small cafe, the kind she used to pass by on her way to the airport every day. She had never been inside, but tonight, for some reason, it felt like the right place to stop. She pulled open the door, the soft chime of the bell above it breaking the silence of the night. Inside, it was warm and cozy, the smell of coffee and baked goods filling the air. A few people sat at tables, their heads buried in their laptops or buried in conversation, completely unaware of the storm raging inside her. She walked up to the counter, her mind still racing, and ordered a coffee. The barista gave her a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She nodded back, though she didn't return the smile. She didn't have the energy for it. She found an empty seat by the window where she could watch the lights of the city twinkle in the distance. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, hoping it might ground her, but it didn't. Nothing was grounding her anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her mom. This time, just one word. Talk? Lisa exhaled slowly. She had been avoiding this, but now there was no getting around it. She knew she had to tell her. She had to be honest. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she started typing. I lost my job today. I messed up bad. She sent the message and waited. The response came quickly, almost immediately. What happened? Lisa stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of where to begin. How did she explain what had happened? The impulse, the words, the way it had spiraled out of control. How could she put all of that into a text without sounding like she was just making excuses? She started typing again, slowly, carefully. I said something I shouldn't have, something political. It wasn't even about politics, I wasn't even thinking. But it was on the flight, and the passenger was, well, you know who it was. And I lost my job over it. Her fingers trembled as she hit send. She put the phone down and looked out the window, watching the cars go by, the city moving around her, the world going on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. For her, the world would never feel the same again. A few minutes passed before the phone buzzed again. Her mother's response was simple, but it made her heart ache. I'm so sorry, honey. Lisa swallowed, trying to push back the tears that had started to form. She couldn't afford to break down right now. Not here, not in front of strangers. She wasn't ready to feel this exposed, this vulnerable. But she couldn't stop the lump in her throat. It felt like all the emotions she had bottled up over the past few hours were finally surfacing, and there was nothing she could do to hold them back. Her phone buzzed again. This time, her mother had called. Lisa hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to talk, but deep down, she knew she needed to. She picked up the phone, pressing it to her ear. For a few seconds, there was silence on the other end before her mother's voice came through, warm but worried. "Lisa, are you okay? What happened? You're scaring me." Her mother's voice cracked and Lisa felt a pang in her chest. She wanted to break down, to explain everything, but the words wouldn't come. She swallowed hard and finally managed to speak, her voice sounding weak to her own ears. I messed up, Mom. I said something I shouldn't have, and now everything's changed." Her mother was silent for a moment, and Lisa could feel the weight of the silence stretch between them. Then, her mom spoke again, softer this time. "I know, honey, but you'll figure this out. It's not the end of the world. You're smart and you've got this. I'm here for you." Lisa squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. Her mother's words were comforting, but they felt so distant. Nothing could change what had happened. But hearing her mother's voice, so calm, so steady, gave her a small sense of relief. Maybe she could figure it out. Maybe she wasn't as lost as she thought. The conversation continued with her mother offering support, asking what she needed, what Lisa wanted to do next. But through it all, Lisa was still struggling with the fact that she had lost everything. She had let a moment of frustration cost her something she had worked so hard for. And no matter what anyone said, that was the hardest thing to accept. The conversation with her mom had given Lisa a brief sense of comfort, but it didn't take long before reality began to settle back in. After hanging up, she sat there in the cafe for a while, staring into her half-drunk coffee. It had grown cold, but Lisa hadn't noticed. Her mind felt like a broken record, repeating the same thoughts over and over again. "You messed up. You messed up. You'll never get this back." The words played in her head like a chant, and no matter how hard she tried to push them away, they kept coming back. It wasn't just about losing her job. She wasn't naive enough to think that her job as a flight attendant was irreplaceable. It wasn't even the loss of security, though that weighed heavily on her. It was the fact that she had let one comment define her entire career. One careless, impulsive remark, and now everything was different. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The regret hit her in waves, each one deeper than the last. The cafe around her seemed distant, almost like a dream. The chatter, the clinking of cups and saucers, the music playing softly in the background. It all felt like noise. Lisa's thoughts were too loud. She needed to get out of there, to do something, anything, to stop the spiraling. But where could she go? What was there left for her to do? She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through social media mindlessly. She hadn't really looked at it all day, too caught up in the whirlwind of her own emotions. But now, her finger hovered over the screen as she saw post after post. People out with friends, posting about their day, their trips, their lives. It felt like everyone else's world was moving forward, while hers was stuck, frozen in that one moment when she had spoken those words. She felt alienated, like she was watching life from the outside. And then, as if on cue, a notification pinged, a text from one of her co-workers. It was short, simple. "Heard about what happened. Are you okay?" Lisa stared at the message for a moment. She didn't know how to respond. There were so many things she wanted to say, but nothing that would make sense. She wasn't okay, and pretending she was wouldn't help. Her thumb hovered over the screen, unsure if she should type out her thoughts, but it felt like a hollow conversation, a void. It wasn't enough to fill the gap she was feeling. Instead of replying, she put the phone down again, letting out a long, deep breath. Her chest felt heavy, weighed down by everything she couldn't control. The thought of facing her co-workers, especially the ones who had known her for years, made her stomach tighten. How would they look at her now? The flight attendants she had worked beside, the ones who had seen her grow into her role, would they view her differently? Would they think she was reckless or even unprofessional? She had to remind herself that it was just one bad decision. Just one. But that didn't stop her from feeling the sting of it. She could imagine the conversations behind her back, the judgment from others. People loved to talk, to share their opinions, especially when it came to something as public as this. How could she even begin to explain herself? Lisa didn't have the answers. She didn't even know where to start. Her thoughts were so tangled that they barely made sense anymore. It felt like she was living in the middle of a fog, with everything she had worked so hard for, everything she had known just fading out of view. She stood up abruptly, feeling restless. She couldn't sit there anymore, not when every minute felt like a reminder of her failure. She needed fresh air, a break from her own head. As she pushed open the cafe door, the crisp evening air hit her, and for a brief second she felt something resembling clarity. The streets outside were quiet now, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. The cool wind washed over her, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts, if only for a moment. She started walking again, without any real direction, just letting her legs carry her through the streets. There was something oddly comforting about the anonymity of the city. No one knew her here, no one knew what had just happened. In this moment, she was just another person walking the streets, trying to make sense of everything. Her mind drifted back to her conversation with her mom. "You'll figure it out." The words echoed in her head. She knew her mother was trying to reassure her, but Lisa didn't feel reassured. Not yet, anyway. How could she? She had no idea what to do next. She had never been in this situation before, and the fear of the unknown was consuming her. What kind of person would she be after this? Would she even get another job in the industry? What was her next step? Lisa stopped walking for a moment, standing on a corner, staring at the streetlights. It was like everything had slowed down around her. She had always prided herself on her ability to bounce back, to learn from her mistakes. But this felt different. She didn't know how to bounce back from this. The damage felt permanent. The reputation she had built over the years, gone in an instant. The thought of walking back into another airline, another airport, another flight. It felt impossible. But then, in the middle of the darkness of those thoughts, a small voice inside her pushed through. "You'll figure it out. You always do." It wasn't much. It wasn't the answer she was looking for. But for the first time in hours, it was enough to give her a small sense of hope. Maybe it would take time. Maybe she wouldn't figure it all out today, or tomorrow, or even next week. But she would figure it out. She always had. With a deep breath, Lisa turned and started walking again, this time with a little more purpose. She didn't know what the next few days would bring, but she was ready to face them. Maybe, just maybe, she hadn't lost everything after all. Maybe this was just a setback, something to learn from, not the end of the road. It was hard to believe that right now, but she was willing to try. Lisa's steps grew more deliberate as she walked, the uncertainty in her chest slowly giving way to a quiet resolve. The city around her remained as busy as ever, but she felt somehow distanced from it all, like she was a spectator rather than a participant. The sound of car engines and distant chatter was muted by the constant buzz of her own thoughts. But something had shifted in her mind, something small yet powerful. The sense of complete defeat that had washed over her earlier was still there, lingering in the background, but now it was accompanied by the faintest spark of determination. Maybe this was just a detour. Maybe she hadn't lost everything just yet. As she continued walking, her phone buzzed again in her pocket, and this time she didn't hesitate. She pulled it out and saw another text from her mom. "Just checking in. You doing okay?" Lisa stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed her reply. She had told her mother the basics of what happened, but now she found herself trying to find the right words to explain how she felt, how lost she felt, how uncertain her future seemed. She started typing, then deleted, then typed again. In the end, she settled for something simple, something that felt true in that moment. "I don't know, Mom. I'm not okay, but I'm trying to be. I'll figure it out. I just need some time. She hit send and leaned against a street lamp, her mind trying to piece together what the future might look like. The words felt hollow at first, like she was trying to convince herself more than her mom. But as soon as they left her hands, a small part of her believed it. She would figure it out. She had to. A few moments passed and her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mom's voice calling. Lisa hesitated before answering. There was a small part of her that wanted to avoid it, but she knew that wasn't fair to her mom, who was just trying to support her. She took a deep breath and answered. "Hey, honey," her mom's voice came through, warm and concerned. "I know this is tough, but I really believe you're going to get through this. You've always bounced back, even when things seemed impossible." Lisa sighed softly, staring up at the sky. The night air was cool, but the weight on her chest felt heavier than the chill. "I don't feel like I can bounce back from this. I messed up so badly, Mom. One stupid comment and now I've lost everything I worked for." What kind of flight attendant gets fired mid-flight for a comment like that? Her mom was quiet for a beat, as if letting the weight of Lisa's words sink in. "Sweetie, I know you're beating yourself up, but you're not the first person to make a mistake. What you said wasn't okay, but it doesn't define who you are. It's one moment. You've got so much more ahead of you. This doesn't have to be the end." Lisa could feel the tears welling up, but she held them back. Her mom's words, though comforting, didn't take away the sting of her reality. "But it feels like the end. What if I can't get another job in the industry? What if no one will trust me after this?" Her mom's voice softened. "I know you're scared, and it feels like everything is falling apart, but remember this. You're not defined by a single mistake. You've worked hard and you've got more to offer than just one incident. Maybe it's time to take a break, reevaluate things, but I know you'll find your way. You've always had a way of landing on your feet." Lisa closed her eyes, letting her mother's words settle in. For a moment it felt like the world had slowed down. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't the end, but just a painful, hard step she had to get through. It didn't make the situation any less difficult, but the idea of moving forward, however slowly, started to feel possible again. "Thanks, Mom," Lisa whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know what to do next, but I'll try. I'll figure it out." "I know you will," her mom replied softly. "Take it one day at a time, and if you ever need anything, I'm here. Always." After they hung up, Lisa stood there for a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of the conversation. Her mom's reassurance, though comforting, hadn't fixed everything, but it had given her something she hadn't had all day. Perspective. Maybe this was just one bad chapter in her story, not the entire book. She didn't know how long it would take to find her footing again, but at least she was beginning to believe that she would. The cold breeze hit her face again, and Lisa took a deep breath, her mind starting to clear. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even have a solid plan yet, but she was beginning to realize that she didn't need to have it all figured out today. She didn't have to have everything in place in a single night. She wasn't completely lost. She still had time. Lisa pushed herself off the street lamp and began walking again, this time with a little more purpose. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time she didn't even look at it. She had made the decision to stop focusing on the past, to stop beating herself up about a mistake that couldn't be undone. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could control what came next. She had to believe that. The night was still young, and though it felt like her world had been upended, she was slowly starting to see that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story. She had made a mistake. Yes, but that didn't mean she had to stay stuck in it. There was a future waiting for her, one step at a time. And for the first time in hours, Lisa felt like she could face it. She wasn't done yet. The night felt like it stretched on forever, but somehow, Lisa's steps felt lighter as she walked through the streets. Her mind, though still heavy with uncertainty, began to shift, piece by piece. She could still feel the sting of what had happened, the embarrassment of it, But there was something else growing within her, a quiet sense of resolve. She wasn't going to let this define her. Not completely, not when there was so much more to her story. Her phone buzzed again, this time a notification from a job search app. Lisa stared at it for a long moment, hesitating. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend like she wasn't ready to face the next chapter just yet. But another part of her knew that sitting in her self-pity wasn't going to get her anywhere. She needed to start moving forward, even if it felt uncomfortable. So she opened the app. The first few listings were for flight attendant positions at other airlines. Her stomach tightened as she scrolled through them. It seemed impossible that she could just apply for a new job right away, especially when her last position had ended so abruptly. But what else could she do? Was she really going to walk away from the career she had worked so hard to build? She quickly shut the app, feeling overwhelmed. It was too soon to think about diving back into the same line of work, not when her reputation was still fresh in her mind, tainted by one reckless comment. But the thought lingered like a seed planted in her mind. Maybe eventually she could get back in the game. Maybe this was just a setback, something she could learn from and bounce back stronger. Lisa continued walking, trying to quiet the storm in her head. The city had started to wind down for the night. Fewer people were out now, and the streets were quieter, the buildings casting long shadows under the dim streetlights. It felt strange to be so alone in the world. She had always been surrounded by people, passengers, colleagues, friends. And now, here she was, walking through the quiet city streets, with no one around but her thoughts. As she walked, she tried to focus on something other than her situation, something that could pull her mind out of the spiral. The sky above was dark, the stars barely visible through the city lights. But there was something about the stillness that calmed her, if only a little. The world didn't stop turning just because she had messed up. There were people out there, living their lives, moving forward, despite the mistakes they made. Lisa had always prided herself on being adaptable. She had always been able to get back up after a fall, so why should this time be any different? Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from one of her closest friends, Emily. She had worked alongside Emily for years, and while they hadn't talked much recently, Lisa knew she could always count on her. The message was short, but sincere. "I heard what happened. You okay? If you need to talk, I'm here." Lisa felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She wasn't alone. Not really. Emily didn't judge her, and she didn't have to explain herself. She could just talk. Let the words spill out, raw and unfiltered. She quickly replied, "I'm hanging in there. I don't even know what to say about it, but thanks for checking in." The reply came almost instantly. "I'm sure you're feeling like the world's falling apart right now, but I know you're tough. You'll get through this. Let's catch up soon, okay?" For the first time all night, Lisa smiled, a small but genuine smile. She wasn't alone. She had people who cared about her. People who saw her as more than just her mistakes. Emily's message reminded her of something important. This was just one chapter, one bad moment in an otherwise full life. She still had a support system, still had friends who believed in her. That meant something. It meant she wasn't as far gone as she felt. The message from Emily sparked something inside her, a small ember of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the line. Maybe it was just a shift, a detour, as her mom had said earlier. If she had made it through tough situations before, she could make it through this one. Lisa pulled her jacket a little tighter around her and continued walking, the cool air brushing against her face. She didn't know what the next few days or weeks would bring, but she knew she wasn't going to sit idly by. She wasn't going to let the weight of this one mistake drag her down for good. She had too much to offer. She had learned too much over the years to give up now. She thought about what her mom had said. Take it one day at a time. It wasn't some grand piece of advice, but it made sense. She didn't have to have it all figured out right away. She just had to take the next step, however small. The road ahead was unclear, but it was hers to walk. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. There would be doubts, fear, maybe even more mistakes along the way. But Lisa also knew that she wasn't defined by any one moment. She wasn't defined by a single failure. She was defined by the way she handled it, by how she picked herself up and kept moving forward. The night had taken a long time to feel this calm, but as she walked, Lisa felt something shift inside her. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't going to pretend like she had it all together. But she had something more important now, the belief that she could get through this, one step at a time. The world around her felt a little less heavy as she walked on, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, guiding her forward. As Lisa continued walking through the quiet streets, the weight of the night didn't seem as heavy. The cool breeze on her face had a calming effect, and the faint sounds of the city around her, distant cars, the occasional pedestrian walking by, began to feel less like a blur of noise and more like a backdrop to her thoughts. She didn't feel entirely at ease yet, but there was something in the air, something in the stillness that allowed her mind to slow down. It was almost as if the world around her had paused, just for a moment, to let her breathe. Her phone buzzed again, but this time Lisa didn't immediately pull it out. She had started to realize that she didn't need to be constantly checking for notifications or messages to distract herself. She needed to find her own clarity, in her own time. Still, the curiosity got the better of her, and she pulled the phone from her pocket. This time it was a text from her sister. "Just heard. Are you okay? Want to talk?" Lisa paused for a moment. Her sister had always been the more pragmatic one, the voice of reason in their family. But she also knew Lisa better than anyone else. They had been through a lot together, and Lisa knew she could count on her for support. She quickly typed a response. "I'm okay. I'm not okay, but I'll be fine. Just need some time to figure things out." The reply came almost instantly. "I get it. If you want to talk, I'm here. You know where I am." Lisa smiled faintly, the familiar comfort of her sister's words grounding her in that moment. There was something about knowing she had a family that had her back, no matter how messy things got. The reminder that she wasn't alone, even when everything felt chaotic, brought a sense of calm she hadn't expected. She felt the tiniest bit of weight lift off her shoulders. She pocketed the phone again, letting the silence surround her once more. The streets were growing emptier as the night deepened. Lisa's pace slowed as she approached a small park, a quiet, secluded space that she had walked through many times before. The tall trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, offered a sense of peace. She stepped into the park, finding the familiar feeling of the grass beneath her feet oddly soothing. She made her way to a bench near the edge of the park and sat down, leaning back and letting her eyes close for a moment. She just needed to breathe. The past few hours had been a blur of stress and confusion, and she couldn't help but feel like she had been running on autopilot, reacting without really processing everything. Now, sitting here in the quiet, she had a moment to think, to reflect. The world around her was still, and for the first time in a while, Lisa allowed herself to be still too. She thought about everything that had happened, the mistakes she'd made, and the way it had changed everything in such a short amount of time. But as her thoughts wandered, she realized something. Yes, the comment had been a mistake. Yes, she had let her frustration get the best of her. But wasn't that part of being human? Wasn't part of the process of growing up learning how to own up to your mistakes and move on? Lisa's fingers curled around the edge of the bench, and she took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let this one moment ruin her. This wasn't who she was. This wasn't what defined her. The people who mattered knew her better than that. Her co-workers, her friends, her family, those who cared about her knew the real Lisa. They knew her work ethic, her integrity, her ability to bounce back from setbacks. One mistake didn't undo all of that. It didn't erase the hard work she had put in over the years. She could learn from this, move forward, and rebuild. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. The calmness of the park, the solitude, gave Lisa the space to gather her thoughts. She hadn't had time for herself in a long while. Not really. Life had always been about the next task, the next responsibility, and she had been so focused on the demands of her job that she'd never really stopped to reflect on what was truly important to her. This moment, this pause, was her chance to reorient herself, to start fresh. The city lights glimmered in the distance, casting a soft glow over the park. The night air had a sharp edge to it, but it felt good, alive. Lisa closed her eyes for a second longer, letting the moment settle deep within her. When she opened her eyes again, the fear and uncertainty were still there, but they no longer had the same grip on her. She could still feel the weight of everything she had lost today, but it wasn't all consuming anymore. It was a part of her story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. She had more to give, more to accomplish, and no matter how long it took, she would get back to it. The city felt quieter now, almost like it had wrapped itself around her in a protective cocoon. The park was empty, and the night air whispered around her. Lisa stood up from the bench, taking one last long look at the darkened skyline before starting to walk again. This time, her steps felt more purposeful, more grounded. She wasn't just walking to escape her thoughts, she was walking towards something. She didn't know exactly what the next steps would be, but she knew they would come. It was going to take time, and it would be hard. But Lisa felt a shift inside her. The weight was still there, but it wasn't crushing her anymore. She could handle this. She would handle this. One step at a time. She had always moved forward, even when things seemed impossible. And this time would be no different. With the quiet night stretching out before her, Lisa walked on, ready for whatever came next. The hours passed unnoticed as Lisa walked through the city, her thoughts slowing down, shifting from one thing to another. The streets, once feeling like a maze of noise and uncertainty, now felt almost familiar. She had wandered through them countless times, but tonight they felt different. It was as though everything around her had taken on a new meaning. The hum of the city, the soft flicker of streetlights, the occasional sound of a car passing by. It all blended together in a quiet rhythm, a backdrop to her own internal shift. Her mind had started to settle, the overwhelming weight of what had happened slowly being replaced with a sense of resolve. There was still a lot to figure out, too much, maybe. But tonight, Lisa realized, she didn't have to solve everything in one go. She had time. She had space to breathe, to think, to regroup. As she walked, her phone buzzed again, and this time she didn't hesitate. It was a text from Emily, the friend who had checked in earlier. "Hey, I was thinking about you. I know it's a tough situation, but don't forget, you've got people who believe in you, and you've got more than one shot at this." Lisa smiled, her thumb hovering over the screen for a moment. "Thanks, Em. You're right, I'll figure it out. I just needed some time to think." She didn't expect a response, but within seconds, Emily replied, "Anytime, you know where I am. We'll grab coffee when you're ready." For the first time since everything had gone wrong, Lisa felt a small glimmer of warmth spread through her. There were people who cared, people who had her back. That was the thing she hadn't fully realized earlier in the day, when the world felt like it was crashing down on her. She had a network of friends, family, and colleagues who believed in her, and no mistake could take that away. Lisa slipped the phone back into her pocket and continued walking. The night had begun to grow quieter still, the city winding down, but she wasn't in any rush to go anywhere. She was taking it all in. The cool air, the dim glow of the streetlights, the soft echo of her footsteps against the pavement. It was as if she was recalibrating herself, finding a rhythm again. The small park she had passed earlier seemed even more inviting now, the benches empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Without thinking, she turned toward it and stepped back into the park, her feet carrying her toward the familiar bench where she had sat earlier. She had walked away for a while to gather her thoughts, but now, the quiet of the park called her back. Sitting down again, Lisa leaned back against the bench, the cool air lifting her hair slightly. The world was calm here. The outside chaos, the demands, the pressure, everything felt far away. It was just her, the city, and the night. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was running away from something. She didn't feel like she was chasing a solution or hiding from her mistakes. She just sat. And in that stillness, she allowed herself to simply be. It was almost like she had finally exhaled, like she was finally letting go of the need to control everything, to have all the answers right now. Lisa's thoughts wandered, back to the moment when her life had changed so suddenly. She remembered the look in her supervisor's eyes when he'd told her she was fired, how surreal it had felt to hear those words. And she still couldn't fully make sense of it, but she was starting to realize that maybe that's okay. Not everything had to make sense right away. Not everything needed to be fixed or explained in a single moment. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself as the chill of the night began to settle in. The park felt like a sanctuary in that moment, a space where she could feel the weight of everything without it crushing her. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something more important. Clarity. The clarity that she didn't have to rush this process, that healing didn't happen in one instant. It was a slow, steady thing, one step at a time. The city around her seemed to breathe with her. The night had a different pace now, one that mirrored the way she was starting to see her own journey. It wasn't about bouncing back immediately, or jumping into something new just to distract herself from the mistakes she had made. It was about taking the time to heal, to really figure out what she wanted next. It was about giving herself the grace to move through this without the constant pressure to be perfect. And in that moment, Lisa understood something that had eluded her before. Mistakes were part of life. They didn't define her. They didn't erase her worth. It was the way she responded to those mistakes that mattered. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the sound of the wind through the trees wash over her. Life hadn't been easy, and it wasn't about to get easier. But Lisa felt something inside her, something resilient, something strong, something she knew she had all along, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. It wasn't over. She wasn't done yet. After a few more moments, Lisa stood up from the bench, her feet carrying her forward once more. This time, the weight on her shoulders didn't feel so heavy. The path ahead wasn't clear, but she was walking it. Every step felt like progress, no matter how small. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Maybe she'd start looking for a new job. Maybe she'd take a few days to breathe. But for the first time in a long while, Lisa felt like she was on the right path. She was moving forward, and that was enough. With a deep breath, she stepped back into the streets, ready to face whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.